Welcome back, traveler, to Sleep of the Gods. Welcome to another calm voyage through the myths of ancient Greece. Tonight, we turn our gaze towards the brilliance of Apollo, the god of light, music, prophecy, and reason, the twin of Artemis, son of Zeus, and one of Olympus's most radiant figures. Apollo represents the harmony between order and chaos, between divine power and mortal fragility. As the gentle glow of dawn banishes the night, his story begins, in light and in sound, with the measured rhythm of a lyre echoing through eternity. As always, if you enjoy these journeys through the myths, stories told not to startle, but to soothe, consider subscribing and leaving a like. It helps the stories travel further and brings more listeners into this quiet world of gods and heroes. Apollo's tale is one of paradoxes. Though he shines with the brilliance of the sun, his light reveals shadows as much as it brings clarity. He is both healer and bringer of plague, both musician and archer, both merciful and vengeful. In him, the Greeks saw the beauty of balance, the divine ideal that every human sought but could never fully attain. In the beginning, Apollo was not merely a god of the sun. That came later. He was first and foremost the god of order, of the measured note, the spoken prophecy, the disciplined act. In a world still young and trembling from the battles of gods and titans, Apollo's light represented calm after chaos, structure after storm. To truly understand him, one must begin not with his golden chariot or his temples of marble, but with the story of his birth, a story marked by persecution, exile, and the desperate endurance of his mother. For before Apollo's first note was played, before his first arrow was loosed, a hunted goddess gave him life upon a drifting island, beneath the burning gaze of Hera's jealousy. So let us begin with the tale of Leto, the wandering mother, and how she brought the light into the time world. Before Apollo's name ever echoed across temples or mountains, there was his mother, Leto, a titaness known for her gentleness, grace, and quiet strength. Yet even her serenity was not enough to shield her from the wrath of the Queen of the Heavens. Hera, ever watchful, ever proud, discovered that Zeus had loved Leto. From that moment, Leto's fate was sealed. Driven from the lands she once called home, Leto wandered endlessly across Greece and beyond. Every land she approached turned her away, fearing Hera's vengeance. No mountain, no city, no island would grant her rest. The earth itself, under Hera's command, denied her sanctuary. Leto's anguish grew heavier with each step. She carried within her the twin children of Zeus, one destined to command the sun, the other to guide the moon. But she had nowhere to give them life. Her voice, once soft and melodic, broke as she pleaded with the winds for mercy. It was then that the island of Delos, barren, trembling and forgotten, rose from the sea, a fragment of earth that drifted rootless upon the waves. Delos offered her refuge, promising safety beneath its humble sands. In return, Apollo would later make this island sacred for all time, a place of pilgrimage and worship, blessed by light. Under a lone palm tree, Leto labored. The first to emerge was Artemis, calm, poised, and watchful, as though born already divine. She helped her mother through the second birth, guiding Apollo into the world with hands untouched by fear. When the newborn god took his first breath, the air shimmered, the island bloomed. Birds sang as if the world itself rejoiced. Apollo's light radiated across the sea, not the burning fire of the sun, but the golden warmth of dawn. From the moment of his birth, he embodied the promise of clarity after suffering. His music, it was said, could heal pain, calm storms, and even guide the souls of the lost. Leto, weary yet serene, looked upon her children. Two divine twins, equal yet opposite. Artemis, the cool reflection of the moon. Apollo, the steady brilliance of the sun. Their bond would never break, even as their paths diverged across myth and eternity. When Hera learned of the birth, her fury was unbounded, but the deed was done. The twins had arrived, untouched by her malice. From the small, trembling island of Delos, Apollo would rise to become one of Olympus's most honored gods. And in that humble beginning lies one of the great truths of Greek myth. That light often comes from exile. That greatness often begins in struggle. Apollo's first cries echoed across the Aegean, a song that would one day become prophecy, poetry, and music itself. Next would come his ascent, his first deeds, his first temple, and his claim over one of the most sacred gifts of all, the power to speak for the divine. From the very dawn of Olympus, there was one power that set Apollo apart from the other gods. His voice, not merely the sound of it, but the power that lay behind it, the harmony between truth and melody, between divine command and gentle persuasion. His was not the thunder of Zeus, nor the whisper of Hermes, nor the storm of Poseidon. It was a voice that shaped destiny, that soothed and commanded, that spoke the will of the gods to mortals with clarity, both beautiful and terrible. After his birth on Delos, Apollo's first great act was not one of compassion, but of conquest. The infant god grew to maturity in a matter of days. Such was the way of the Olympians, and he set his sights upon a place known as Delphi, a sacred site guarded by a monstrous serpent called Python. This creature was born of the earth itself, a child of Gaia, and had once served the ancient powers that ruled before the Olympians rose. But the world had changed. The reign of Zeus demanded new order, new voices, new light. So Apollo descended upon Delphi, bow in hand, golden arrows gleaming like rays of dawn, and challenged the serpent. The earth shook, and the mountains echoed with his song of battle. With each arrow, he struck closer to Python's heart, until at last the creature fell, writhing and hissing, its body dissolving into the dust from which it came. In that moment, the cave where the serpent had dwelled became something new, not a lair of shadow, but a temple of light. Apollo claimed it as his own, decreeing that it would be a place of prophecy, where mortals could hear the voice of the divine. Yet even in his triumph, Apollo felt the weight of what he had done, for to slay a child of Gaia was to commit a kind of sacrilege, and the earth itself demanded atonement. To purify himself, Apollo journeyed far, offering penance and song until he was cleansed of his deed. Only then did he return to Delphi, sanctified and wise. From that day forward, the Oracle of Delphi became the most sacred site in all of Greece. There, the Pythia, a mortal priestess chosen by the god, would inhale the sacred vapors that rose from beneath the temple and fall into a trance. Through her lips, Apollo spoke, his words often veiled in riddles, his prophecies shimmering between truth and illusion. Kings and heroes would come from across the world to seek his counsel. They would ask of wars, of voyages, of love, of destiny. And the voice of Apollo would answer, never false, but never simple. It was said that when the Pythia spoke, the god himself filled her chest. Her breath mingled with his, her heart beating to the rhythm of his divine music. And in those moments, the boundary between human and God, between the mortal and the eternal, blurred into one trembling harmony. But prophecy was only one side of Apollo's gift. The other was music, the divine art that gave structure to chaos and emotion to silence. It was said that Hermes, as a newborn, once crafted the first lyre from a tortoise shell, and in a playful act of trickery, gifted it to Apollo as a token of peace after stealing his cattle. Where another god might have punished the boy, Apollo was delighted. He plucked the strings and found in them the same resonance that lived within his soul. From that moment on, the lyre became his symbol, his instrument, his companion. Through his music, Apollo healed hearts, calmed storms, and brought order to the world. The rhythm of his melodies was said to echo through the very motions of the cosmos, the movement of the stars, the rise and fall of the seasons, the beating of mortal hearts. To play the lyre was not merely to make sound, it was to converse with creation itself. In the tranquil evenings of Olympus, when the sun had sunk beyond the horizon, Apollo would sit upon a marble step, lyre in hand, and sing. The gods would gather, silent and spellbound. Even Ares would set aside his weapons, even Hermes his tricks. The music of Apollo reached them all, pure, measured, radiant. It was said that even the muses themselves, daughters of memory and inspiration, would fall silent to listen. Mortals, too, believed that every note that drifted down from the heavens carried a fragment of that divine harmony. The poets and musicians of Greece called upon Apollo before every performance, whispering his name for guidance and inspiration. For to create beauty, they believed, was to honor him. And yet, like all divine gifts, Apollo's mastery of prophecy and music came with shadows. His words could uplift or destroy. His songs could heal or wound. The same truth that revealed destiny could also drive mortals to madness. Those who misunderstood his prophecies often brought about the very fates they sought to avoid. And those who challenged his musical skill, proud mortals who fancied themselves equals to the god, met with swift punishment, as we shall soon see. For Apollo, radiant and golden as he was, remained a god, and gods do not take kindly to pride in mortals. For all his beauty and brilliance, Apollo's light cast long shadows. Wherever he went, mortals and immortals alike were drawn to him, to his music, his knowledge, his golden perfection. But light, when too radiant, can burn. And often, the stories of Apollo reveal not only his grace, but also the dangers of pride in others and within himself. The first of his famous rivalries came from a mortal named Marsyas, a satyr of the forest, half man, half goat, full of mischief and earthy joy. One day, Marsyas found a strange instrument lying upon the ground, the Aulus, a double flute that produced haunting, beautiful sounds. It had been discarded by Athena, who had invented it, but cast it aside after discovering that playing it distorted her divine face. Marsyas, enchanted by its melody, took up the flute and played it with such passion that nymphs, shepherds, and even the trees seemed to sway to his music. Word of his skill spread far and wide and soon reached Apollo himself. The god of the lyre listened, and for the first time felt a flicker of mortal challenge. In his pride, Apollo descended to earth and challenged Marsyas to a contest of music. The rules were simple. The victor would decide the fate of the loser. And so, in a grove heavy with expectation, the god and the satyr began to play. Marsyas went first, and his flute sang with the voice of nature itself, wild, raw, and alive. The song carried the pulse of rivers, the whisper of the wind, the heartbeat of the earth. It was imperfect, yet beautiful, a reflection of mortal passion, unbound by order. Then Apollo answered with the lyre, and his song was flawless. Each note fell like sunlight through leaves, perfect in rhythm and harmony. The contest continued, each musician outdoing the other, until Apollo, in a test of arrogance or perhaps divine cunning, proposed a final challenge. They would both play their instruments upside down and sing while doing so. Marsyas tried, but the flute could not be played in such a way. The lyre, however, obeyed its master. Apollo's melody filled the forest once more, pure and untouchable. By divine law, Marsyas had lost, and the punishment for daring to rival a god was cruel beyond words. Apollo, still burning with the fire of wounded pride, ordered Marsyas to be flayed alive, his skin torn from his body as he screamed beneath the god's cold gaze. It is said that the nymphs wept, and their tears became the river Marsyas, which still flows as a mournful reminder of the day mortal passion met divine perfection. This story, harsh and unsettling, reveals the dual nature of Apollo's light. For while he was a god of art and beauty, he was also a god of order, and in that order there was no place for the wild imperfection of mortal creativity. The same purity that gave his songs power could also make his heart cruel. Yet Apollo's rivalries were not limited to mortals. Among the gods too, his pride found mirrors and opponents. One of his most famous contests was with Pan, the rustic god of shepherds, whose flute and pipes charmed the mountains. When the two competed, the judge was King Midas, a mortal known for his wealth and poor judgment. Apollo played first, his lyre singing of heaven and symmetry, of golden light and divine order. Pan replied with a melody of earth, simple, joyful, chaotic, full of life's unrefined essence. The crowd cheered for Pan, and Midas declared him the victor. But Apollo, smiling thinly, said nothing. Instead, he simply touched Midas's head, and the king's ears transformed into those of a donkey. Thus, he might better appreciate the music of beasts. And then there was Cassandra, a mortal woman blessed and cursed by the god's affection. She was a princess of Troy, wise and beautiful, and Apollo offered her a divine gift, the power of prophecy. In return, he asked for her love, but when she accepted his gift and then rejected his advances, the god's grace turned to vengeance. He did not take back her foresight, but instead cursed it, that no one would ever believe her prophecies. So it was that Cassandra foresaw the fall of Troy, the death of her people, the ruin of her city, and though she screamed her visions to all who would listen, no one ever did. Her voice, like the flute of Marsyas, was swallowed by the pride of Apollo, who could not bear to be defied. Through these stories, a pattern emerges of a god both radiant and merciless, whose perfection left little room for imperfection in others. His music brought harmony, but also demanded submission. His truth illuminated the world, but could scorch those who stood too close. Yet beneath his wrath, there was a strange kind of justice. For every act of vengeance, every cruel punishment, Apollo also taught a lesson that even beauty and wisdom can be dangerous when wielded without compassion. That light, untempered by mercy, blinds rather than reveals. And still, mortals continue to love him, not in spite of his contradictions, but because of them. For Apollo embodied what they longed to be: pure, radiant, divine, yet forever reaching for balance in a world that never stops shifting between chaos and order, silence and song. Apollo was not only the god of the sun, prophecy, and healing. He was also the divine patron of the arts, the eternal inspiration behind music, poetry, and dance. From the moment he drew the first notes on his golden lyre, the world seemed to pulse with rhythm, as if the universe itself were performing a silent, celestial symphony. The Muses, daughters of Mnemosyne, the goddess of memory, were entrusted to the guidance of Apollo. Each muse held dominion over a different art or discipline: Calliope for epic poetry, Clio for history, Erato for lyric poetry, Terpsichore for dance, and so on. Together, they formed a chorus of divine creativity, singing the stories of gods and mortals alike. But it was Apollo who led them, setting the melody, shaping harmony, and teaching mortals to hear the music of existence itself. The myths tell us that Apollo would often visit mortals to bestow inspiration. Poets claim to hear his whisper as they penned verses. Musicians felt his hands upon their instruments. Yet, the god's gift was never given lightly. To possess creativity under Apollo's guidance was both a blessing and a challenge. For the same god who inspired could also demand perfection and punish hubris. One of the most famous tales illustrating this balance is the story of Marsyas, a satyr who found a discarded flute and claimed mastery over music. Marsyas challenged Apollo to a contest, confident in his newfound skill. The god accepted, and they played for the muses and the gods. Marsyas performed brilliantly, but Apollo's lyre was the voice of divinity itself, flawless, resonant, and eternal. When Marsyas could not match the god's perfection, he was punished, flayed alive for his arrogance. The story is chilling, yet it carries a lesson. True art is not merely skill, but humility before the muse and the divine. Apollo's influence extended beyond contests and cautionary tales. He was said to have taught the lyre, kithara, and panpipes to mortals, shaping the very fabric of music. His songs reflected the cosmos, the rising and setting of stars, the tides of emotion, the passage of time. In his presence, art became not merely imitation, but a mirror of the universe itself. The Greeks understood that Apollo's gift was transformative. Music could soothe a weary soul, inspire courage, or even alter the course of events. Warriors marching to the rhythm of a hymn, poets reciting tales of gods and heroes, dancers performing rituals in honor of divine mysteries. All were connected by Apollo's unseen hand. Each note, each word, each movement carried a trace of his light, a fragment of his eternal presence. Even the tragedies of Apollo's life shaped the arts. His grief over Hyacinthus, the heartbreak of Coronis, and the relentless pursuit of knowledge infused his melodies with emotion, depth, and meaning. The lyre was not just an instrument, it was an extension of his soul. Through music, mortals glimpsed the complexity of the divine, the intertwining of joy and sorrow, creation and destruction, love and loss. Stories also speak of Apollo's contests with other mortals and gods, each of them a lesson in ambition, skill, and divine favor. In his duel with Pan, the god of the wild, Apollo again demonstrated the duality of his nature. While he punished arrogance, he also rewarded excellence and devotion. Pan's music was wild, untamed, echoing the forests, while Apollo's music brought structure, clarity, and harmony. Together, these contests symbolized the tension between instinct and intellect, chaos and order, freedom and discipline. The temples of Apollo, particularly Delos and Delphi, became centers not only of worship, but of artistic practice. Here, mortals could learn from priests and performers inspired by Apollo himself. Festivals celebrated his gifts, Pythian games with music, poetry, and athletic competitions honored the god of light and creativity. These gatherings reflected the deep understanding that art was a sacred bridge between the human and the divine. In philosophy and later literature, Apollo's role as the god of the arts continued to evolve. Plato wrote of music as a means to cultivate the soul. Aristotle reflected on the transformative power of poetry, and poets like Pindar and Hesiod immortalized Apollo's influence through verse. His inspiration became a symbol, the reminder that creativity is not frivolous, but essential, a force capable of shaping minds, societies, and the moral compass of civilization. Through the ages, even as empires rose and fell, Apollo's musical and artistic legacy endured. His influence can be traced from the strings of a lyre to the brushstrokes of Renaissance painters, from the rhythm of epic poems to the choreography of sacred dances. The god who taught mortals to listen to the music of the spheres continues to whisper in every note, every line, every movement that carries the spark of divine inspiration. Apollo's relationship with the muses teaches us that art is a conversation between mortal and immortal, between chaos and harmony, between what is fleeting and what is eternal. To invoke Apollo is to invite inspiration, but also to accept the responsibility that comes with it, to listen, to practice, and to respect the unseen order behind creation. In this way, Apollo remains timeless. He is the patron of every poet who doubts, every musician who trembles before a note, every artist who wonders if their work will last. He is the light guiding the hand and heart of creation, a reminder that beauty, when paired with discipline and reverence, can become everlasting. And so, as you reflect on his stories, let the image of Apollo not be distant or untouchable, but alive in the music you hear, in the art you create, and in the quiet moments when inspiration strikes unexpectedly, as if the god himself had reached through time to offer a single note, a single phrase, a single spark. For all his power, for all his beauty, Apollo was never spared the sting of longing, His heart, golden and vast, burned often, but it burned alone. No story captures this truth more vividly than his pursuit of Daphne, the nymph of the forests, daughter of the river god Peneus. It began not with love, but with mockery. After Apollo's victory over the monstrous python at Delphi, he crossed paths with Eros, the young god of desire. With the arrogance of triumph still glowing in him, Apollo laughed at the boy's bow and arrows. "Little archer," he said, "what are you doing with a weapon fit for me? Leave war and glory to those who can bear them." Eros said nothing, but in silence, he nocked 2 arrows, one tipped with gold to ignite love, the other with lead to repel it. The golden arrow struck Apollo, the leaden one struck Daphne, and thus one heart was set aflame while the other froze forever shut. From that moment, Apollo's desire was unstoppable. He saw Daphne and felt his soul unravel. Her hair, the color of ripe wheat, her eyes, like the shadow of rivers, her steps, the whisper of leaves. To him, she was nature made divine, freedom given form. But Daphne wanted none of it. She had sworn herself to Artemis, vowing to live untouched, to roam the forests and rivers without ever bowing to love or marriage. She lived for the wind, the hunt, and the solitude of trees. And so when Apollo called to her, she fled. He chased her across meadows and hills, calling her name, not as a god, but as a desperate man. He promised tenderness, protection, eternity. But every word was a chain, and Daphne ran harder, her breath catching in sobs, her heart a wild drumbeat of fear. The forest blurred around them. Her feet touched the riverbank of her father, Peneus, and in one final plea, she cried out, "Father, help me, change my form, destroy this beauty that brings me such pain." And before Apollo could reach her, her body began to change, her feet rooted to the ground, her arms stretched skyward, her hair turned to leaves of shimmering green. Bark crept over her skin, sealing her in silence. Daphne had become a laurel tree. Apollo stopped, the air still trembling with pursuit. His hands touched her trunk, still warm, still alive beneath the bark. He could no longer hold her, no longer speak to her, no longer love her as he wished. Yet his passion did not die. Instead, it transformed into reverence. He whispered, "If you will not be my lover, then you shall be my sacred tree." And so the laurel became the emblem of Apollo. Its leaves used to crown poets, heroes, and victors. The god who could not have love made beauty eternal, turning loss into legend. Yet beneath the triumph of symbolism lay the ache of failure. Apollo had won no heart that day, only a symbol of what he could never possess: purity, freedom, and the peace that forever fled from him. The story of Daphne is not one of love, but of the tragedy that often hides behind it, of how even the brightest light can cast the darkest shadow when it seeks to claim what was never meant to be possessed. And in that shadow, Apollo's story deepened, from the proud god of music and prophecy to something far more human, a being learning again and again that even immortality cannot shield the heart from rejection. If Daphne's story was a lesson in the pain of pursuit, then the tales of Coronis and Hyacinthus were lessons in the cruelty of fate. For Apollo, love was never soft. It always arrived as lightning, brilliant, violent, and gone too soon. Coronis was a mortal princess of dazzling beauty, chosen by Apollo himself. In her, he found warmth that even Olympus could not give him. He loved her deeply, and she bore his child. But as often happens with gods, time and distance stretched the bond thin. Apollo had duties, temples to bless, oracles to whisper through, and Coronis, left alone, fell into the arms of another man. The raven, once pure white, saw the betrayal and flew to Apollo, telling him everything. In that moment, the god's light became fire. Jealousy consumed him. He struck Coronis down, his arrow piercing the heart that once beat for him. And yet, as soon as she fell, the rage dissolved into regret. He ran to her, but it was too late. The body that once shone like morning lay still. In the quiet that followed, Apollo cursed himself and cursed the raven too, staining its feathers black forever. But before leaving, he reached into the stillness of her womb and drew forth their child, Asclepius, who had become the god of medicine. From death, Apollo stole one spark of life. From betrayal, he forged healing. It was his way to turn agony into art, loss into legacy, but the scar remained. Then came Hyacinthus, the Spartan prince, radiant, youthful, and beloved not only by Apollo, but by the west wind, Zephyrus. Together, Apollo and Hyacinthus played in the sunlight, their laughter echoing across valleys. The god taught him the lyre, the bow, and the language of stars. For a while, Apollo forgot that he was divine. He was simply alive. But jealousy once again slithered in. Zephyrus watched them with bitter envy. One day, as Apollo and Hyacinthus played discus in the fields, Zephyrus twisted the wind. The disc, meant for the sky, curved and struck Hyacinthus in the temple. The boy fell, and blood bloomed across the grass like crimson petals. Apollo rushed to him, cradling his head, trying to command the life to return, but not even the god of healing could mend this wound. He whispered to him, sang to him, wept over him, and from his tears, where they fell upon the earth, sprang the hyacinth flower, a bloom marked with dark letters, said to spell out A-I-I, the cry of grief. Once again, Apollo was left with symbols instead of souls, a laurel, a flower, a legend, all beautiful, all lifeless. His immortality was a prison of remembrance. He could not die, but he could lose again and again. And so he turned pain into ritual, memory into worship. The poets who wrote of him did not paint him as merely a god of light, but as the embodiment of contrast, joy and despair, creation and destruction, divinity and heartbreak. For in Apollo's life, beauty was never gentle. It was edged with tragedy. He loved with the intensity of the sun, and like the sun, he burned everything he touched. Yet from those ashes rose art, music, prophecy, the very soul of civilization. Perhaps that is why mortals revere him still, not for his perfection, but for the pain that made him real. Apollo's role in the lives of mortals was not limited to light, prophecy, or music. He was also the god who brought both disease and healing, a deity whose touch could wound or restore with equal inevitability. This duality, the power to destroy and to save, made him both feared and revered, a constant reminder of the precarious balance between life and death. From the earlier stories, Apollo was associated with plagues. In the Iliad, during the Trojan War, he struck the Greek army with a terrible pestilence after they insulted his priest, Chryses. His arrows carried the invisible disease, and men fell in agony, showing the mortal cost of offending a god. Yet the same Apollo who delivered sickness could also cure it, demonstrating that destruction and restoration are two sides of the same divine coin. His healing abilities were often mediated through his son, Asclepius, born to Coronis. Coronis, while carrying the child, was struck by Apollo's wrath for infidelity, but he saved the unborn Asclepius and entrusted him to the centaur Chiron. Under Chiron's guidance, Asclepius became the greatest physician of myth, learning the secrets of herbs, surgery, and the balance of the human body. Through his son, Apollo's healing power became more tangible, passed down as knowledge that mortals could apply. Temples dedicated to Apollo often served as healing centers, places where worshippers sought cures for ailments, guidance in health, and protection from disease. The god's priests would offer rituals, prayers, and medicinal knowledge, blending spirituality with practical care. In this way, Apollo bridged the divine and the mortal, the physical and the spiritual, the visible and the unseen. Many myths illustrate the delicate tension between illness and health under Apollo's influence. In the story of Hippolytus, the young hunter is struck by tragedy, but Apollo's guidance indirectly ensures moral lessons about honor, chastity, and devotion. In the tale of Trojan warriors, plague, and intervention, we see how Apollo's actions are not capricious cruelty, but rather divine lessons shaped by cosmic order. Disease was not simply punishment, it was also an opportunity to reflect, adapt, and respect the gods. The Greeks also recognized that Apollo's healing powers were intimately connected with his other domains. Music and rhythm, for instance, were considered therapeutic. His lyre could soothe the mind, ease grief, and restore emotional balance, a subtle form of medicine. Poetry and dance, inspired by Apollo, often served as moral and spiritual guidance, indirectly shaping physical and mental health. Moreover, Apollo's association with the sun was itself a form of healing. Exposure to sunlight, the warmth of his radiance, was linked with vitality and the well-being of both mortals and crops. Light, as a symbol and as a literal presence, was therapeutic, a gift of Apollo that reminded mortals of their connection to the divine order. Philosophers and physicians in later centuries continued to draw on Apollo's influence. The Hippocratic tradition, though mortal in origin, often invoked the god as the source of knowledge and wisdom necessary for understanding the human body. The duality of disease and healing was seen as part of a larger moral and cosmic framework, with Apollo at its center, a deity whose lessons went beyond mere physical health to encompass ethics, balance, and respect for life itself. Even in literature and art, Apollo's healing aspect persisted. Depictions of the god show him holding a bow, his arrows capable of both plague and relief, or standing alongside Asclepius, symbolizing the transmission of divine knowledge. Temples often displayed inscriptions and statues, encouraging both reverence and reflection, reminding mortals that the same God who could punish could also restore if honor and respect were observed. Through all these stories, one message is clear. Apollo embodies the inevitable cycles of life. Illness is not always cruel, nor healing always merciful. Both are part of a divine rhythm that teaches mortals about their own mortality, resilience, and responsibility. By learning to understand and honor these forces, humans could find guidance, solace, and wisdom in the face of life's uncertainties. In a world where death and sickness were constant companions, Apollo's presence offered hope, guidance, and a template for living with awareness. His arrows, both destructive and restorative, were reminders of the delicate balance that governs all things. To invoke Apollo was not merely to pray for health, but to recognize the sacred order of existence, the interplay of power, compassion, and responsibility that shapes the mortal experience. Even today, as modern medicine advances and disease is confronted with science, the essence of Apollo's lessons remains. The intertwining of knowledge, discipline, care, and respect mirrors the god's influence. The human pursuit of healing is a continuation of divine guidance, a dance between mortality and immortality, between suffering and restoration. By understanding Apollo as both the bringer of plagues and the giver of cures, we grasp the full scope of his power. He is a reminder that life itself is neither simple nor predictable, and that the lessons of mythology carry truths that endure far beyond their time. Among all the temples that ever rose to the gods, none shone brighter than Delphi. Built high upon the slopes of Mount Parnassus, where the winds whispered through the pines and the stones seemed to hum with unseen energy, Delphi was not just a shrine, it was a heartbeat. And that heartbeat pulsed with the will of Apollo. Before it belonged to him, however, it was the domain of the serpent Python, a creature born from the rot of the earth itself, spawned after the great flood of Deucalion. Python guarded the navel of the world, the Omphalos, and its breath carried pestilence and chaos. When Apollo arrived radiant and young, he saw not just a monster, but a force that stood between mortals' enlightenment. And as he had done before, he fought for clarity, for order, for light. With his golden bow, Apollo struck Python down. The serpent writhed and bled into the stones, its body sinking into the sacred soil. From that death, the Oracle of Delphi was born, a place where the boundaries between divine and mortal blurred. Yet even Apollo, the god of reason and purity, could not erase all traces of the serpent's madness. He purified the ground, but some say the fumes that rose from the cracks still carried Python's whisper, a trace of chaos in every prophecy. The priestess of the temple, the Pythia, would inhale those vapors and enter a trance. Her words would flow in broken fragments, a mixture of divine truth and delirium. And Apollo's priests, standing nearby, would shape those fragments into coherent verses. It was said that the god spoke through her, his voice both beautiful and terrifying, his truth both a blessing and a curse. For in Delphi, truth was never gentle. It came in riddles, in paradoxes, in half-seen glimpses of destiny. Kings, warriors, and philosophers came from every corner of the world to hear Apollo's words, and yet few left with peace in their hearts. For the oracle never lied, but it never comforted either. Take for instance Croesus, the wealthy king of Lydia. He asked the oracle if he should go to war with Persia. The Pythia replied, "If you cross the river, you will destroy a great empire." Emboldened, Croesus attacked and lost. The empire he destroyed was his own. That was Apollo's truth, clear, precise, and mercilessly double-edged. In another tale, Orestes, haunted by the Furies after killing his mother, sought refuge in Delphi. Apollo took pity on him, promising redemption through the trial of Athens. But even then, the god's justice was not clean. It was tangled, human, and complex, for Apollo did not always stand for moral perfection. He stood for the balance between chaos and order, between vengeance and reason. Delphi became the spiritual center of the ancient world, the place where every question began and ended with silence. For even after the prophecies were spoken, one could never be certain what Apollo truly meant. He was the god who illuminated the world and yet wrapped it in mystery. His temple burned with the eternal flame of knowledge, but its smoke always smelled faintly of madness. To the Greeks, Delphi was more than a sanctuary. It was the proof the truth was not given, it was earned. To ask Apollo for an answer was to stand naked before your own fate, to see what you were not ready to see. And that was perhaps his greatest gift. He did not tell mortals what they wanted to hear. He told them what they needed to understand. Even centuries later, as empires rose and fell, Delphi endured. The Romans came and renamed, rebuilt, and worshipped in Latin tongues, yet the mountains still whispered in Greek. Even when Christianity spread through the empire, silencing the old gods one by one, the last voice to fade was that of the Pythia, a trembling echo of Apollo's song, swallowed at last by time. And as the marble columns cracked and the sacred fire turned to ash, one could almost imagine Apollo still there, a shadow of light wandering the ruins, waiting for mortals to ask one last question. For that is what he represents even now. The eternal hunger for knowledge, the uneasy alliance between wisdom and madness. To follow Apollo is to search endlessly, to question endlessly, to look into the sun knowing it might blind you. And yet, like every seeker before us, we keep looking. If there was ever a bond among the gods that defied time, it was the bond between Apollo and Artemis, twin children of Leto, born under the shadow of Hera's wrath, yet destined to rule the heavens in harmony. From the very beginning, their natures were divided by light itself. Apollo, radiant and reasoned, embodied the sun, the burning force of intellect and music, of order and understanding. Artemis, calm and unyielding, embodied the moon, the cool reflection of instinct, of mystery and of silence. They were not opposites, but rather two halves of a divine balance. Where Apollo brought light to the mind, Artemis brought peace to the spirit. And the Greeks saw in them the eternal dance of day and night, not in conflict, but in rhythm, for neither could exist without the other. Their bond was forged in struggle. When Hera forbade Leto to give birth anywhere the sun touched, Leto wandered endlessly across land and sea. Finally, the floating island of Delos offered refuge, a land that touched neither sky nor earth, where Hera's curse could not reach. There, under swaying palms, Leto gave birth first to Artemis, and it was the newborn Artemis who helped her mother deliver Apollo. From that moment, the goddess of the moon became the guardian of childbirth, and the god of the sun became the guardian of reason and healing. In their youth, the twins roamed the wilds together. They hunted, played, and sang. And though their domains would one day diverge, their love remained constant. Artemis, protector of nature, found divinity in the untouched forests and the cry of the deer. Apollo, protector of civilization, found divinity in the measured chord and the verse that stirred the heart. One sought silence, the other sound, and yet, in both, there was a kind of music. The poets loved to imagine them not just as gods, but as symbols of the human condition, our eternal longing for both clarity and mystery. For who among mortals does not yearn for knowledge by day and peace by night? To invoke Apollo was to beg for vision, for a path forward. To invoke Artemis was to beg for stillness, for shelter from the storm. Yet the twins were not immune to wrath. When the Niobids dared to mock their mother, Leto, by claiming that Niobe was greater because she had more children, Apollo and Artemis struck her down. Each arrow carried a quiet fury. Apollo's burned like the sun, Artemis's stung like frost. And as Niobe wept over her fallen children, she turned to stone, a mountain forever shedding tears. It was a cruel balance, perhaps, but balance nonetheless. The twins defended honor, not out of pride, but out of divine necessity. Their myths intertwine in moments of tragedy and revelation. When Orion, the great hunter, sought to claim Artemis for himself, some versions say it was Apollo who tricked her into killing him. He dared her to shoot a distant target in the sea, knowing it was Orion's head rising from the waves. When she learned the truth, Artemis was heartbroken. Her grief so deep that she placed Orion's spirit among the stars, ensuring he would never vanish entirely. Even gods, it seemed, could not escape the cruelty of fate. But where there was death, there was always rebirth. As the sun set, the moon rose. As day fell into night, Apollo's light yielded to Artemis's calm. They were the two breaths of the same universe, one inhaling, the other exhaling. In Delphi, worshippers of Apollo sang hymns in the morning, while in the forests, under the silver light of Artemis, maidens danced in silence by night. The ancients saw their duality as a reflection of life itself, the endless cycle of consciousness and rest, clarity and dream. Apollo represented what we can control: knowledge, craft, medicine. Artemis represented what we cannot: nature, instinct, death, rebirth. Together, they formed a perfect whole, the divine equilibrium that all existence strives toward. In later centuries, philosophers like Plutarch and Plotinus would reinterpret their myth not as two siblings, but as two forces within the soul. Apollo became the higher mind, reaching upward to truth, while Artemis became the grounding instinct that returns us to the earth. One without the other led to madness, a world of thought without rest, or of instinct without reason. And so the Greeks prayed to both, not to dominate, but to coexist. Even now, when the sun dips below the horizon and the moon rises in silence, there's a moment, a brief golden stillness where the two seem to touch. That twilight, that fleeting hour, was to the ancients a sacred sign, the balance of all things, the meeting of brother and sister, of light and shadow. It reminded them that even gods who ruled separate realms were bound by an invisible thread, the same thread that binds all opposites, all souls, all stories. And perhaps, in that twilight, Apollo's lyre still hums faintly, answered by the whisper of Artemis's bow. Their duet continues, even when no one listens, a divine reminder that harmony is not found in sameness, but in the dance between difference. As the myths unfold, as stories of love, loss, and wisdom drift through the ages, one truth about Apollo becomes clear: his light does not fade. It is not merely the sun that rises and falls, but the enduring presence of a god whose influence touches all facets of life: music, poetry, healing, prophecy, and even the understanding of ourselves. Apollo's legacy is paradoxical. He brings clarity and confusion, joy and grief, inspiration and warning. Mortals sought him for answers, yet often received more questions. They looked to him for light, only to find the shadows of their own choices reflected in it. And perhaps that is the most human part of his story, the recognition that even gods teach lessons we are not always ready to understand. Throughout history, civilizations have remembered Apollo in countless ways. Temples rose across the Mediterranean, from the cliffs of Delphi to the sunlit shores of Delos. Poets and philosophers invoked him, not simply to honor a deity, but to align themselves with the ideals he represented: perfection, tempered by imperfection; power, tempered by compassion; wisdom, tempered by experience. In the arts, Apollo's image endures. From classical statues capturing his youthful grace to Renaissance paintings where his lyre sings across canvas and marble, he remains a symbol of human aspiration, the pursuit of knowledge, the mastery of craft, and the courage to confront both beauty and tragedy. Even today, his myths resonate. They are whispered in the chords of music, in the verses of poetry, in the quiet moments of reflection where we seek understanding beyond the obvious. Yet more than temples or art, Apollo's true legacy lies in the lessons he leaves us. That love is both a gift and a trial, often bringing both joy and sorrow. That knowledge is not always comfort, but it is essential for growth. That loss and tragedy are part of the divine fabric, shaping resilience, creativity, and empathy. As we think of the god of the sun, we are reminded that light always returns, even after the darkest nights. That knowledge can illuminate, and that beauty, when tempered with wisdom, becomes eternal. And now, as this journey through Apollo's life draws to a close, we invite you, the listener, to carry with you a piece of his story, the reminder that even in the fleeting moments of failure or heartbreak, there is light. Even in silence, there is music. Even in endings, there is legacy. Thank you for joining this long walk through the myths and lessons of Apollo. If you enjoyed this journey, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment below where and when you are listening. Your support helps us continue exploring the fascinating world of mythology, one calm story at a time. And now, let the stories linger softly in your mind, like sunlight at dusk, guiding you gently toward rest and reflection.